good beef. The folks over at Hassel Cattle Company are making just incredible Wagyu beef that's affordable for every man or woman, and they ship to all of the United States of America. So make sure you're checking out the blue collar Wagyu. Why they call it blue collar Wagyu? Well, that's just because, like I mentioned, it's a very, very affordable product, and man, is it delicious. They've got the New York strip, the beef bacon, the Wagyu Frank with no fillers. They've got 2 jerky flavors, original and sweet and spicy. Their hamburger won Food Network's Northeast Burger Jam. And not only do we love their beef, but the whole country loves their beef. I spoke to a unnamed member of the DNVR family who said they've already made 4 orders from Hassel Cattle Company, huge ones, above the threshold of free shipping, which is over $200. So these people are just crushing Wagyu beef once they try it out from Hassel Cattle Company. And that's right. If you have an order over $200, you'll get free shipping, and they ship it quick. And you can use the code DNVR10 for 10% off your order, whether it's $200 or $20. So make sure you're checking out Hassel Cattle Company.
Number 1 for the one and only DNVR. 2 goes out to Zach, Mace, RK, and the bar. 3 for Mr. B in that old trophy case. Number 4 we're still waiting for. Well, bring on the chase. Out on the field, a mile high, Broncos win is our desire. Couple with a breakfast crew and a friend, bleed orange and blue to the bitter end. Come and join us at the DNVR. We are DNVR.
We are DNVR, and we are presented by MSU Denver Online. Check out msudenver.edu/online to see all they have to offer. They are the Colorado institution providing rigorous and affordable programs taught by professors who bring the real world into the classroom. And my favorite little MSU Denver tidbit is that students who attend MSU Denver work twice as many hours as students attending any other Colorado institution. So if you're someone who's looking to keep that full-time job while furthering your education to hopefully get a better full-time job, MSU Denver is the place for you. msudenver.edu/online.
My boys, what's going on? Guys, we are within 1 week of a very big day. And I'm not talking about the franchise tag deadline on March 9th. I'm talking about Ryan's birthday on March 9th.
I love to hear it. Love to hear it. I got an early birthday present last night when Brandon Spano threw me a very ill-advised interception late in our Madden game for me to pull through with the 18-17 slugfest victory.
And the 11-point comeback in that game. And Ryan, the most impressive part of that was you held the ball after he threw that interception to you. You held the ball for 5.5 minutes, which is equivalent in real football time to like 11 minutes, which is just insane.
Yeah, you got to grind it out when you get the opportunity. That's what my team built to do. So I'm happy about that. And I'm happy to be talking to you guys this morning with what I think is a really interesting topic here on the DNVR Broncos podcast, because we got 2 questions. So I want to start with the first question, which is, can the Broncos pay 2 safeties high-level safety money? Kareem Jackson, already a top 10 safety based on the money that he's earning. Can they add a top 5 safety to that group, or are they going to have to subtract one to add that?
Yes, they can. They can. And here's what it would do. So this year, Kareem Jackson making $12.8 million in cap hit. Let's say Justin Simmons gets that big $15 million per year deal. What I imagine they would do with the cap, guys, is kind of backload the contract a little bit to ease that up. But for this conversation, let's just say it's $15 million. Well, instantly, guys, the Broncos would become, they would spend the most on their safeties, both on the duo and their safety room of anyone in the league by far. They'd be spending $30 million this year in cap space on their safety position. They can do it. But here's the thing, guys. If they pick up Kareem Jackson's option, they franchise tag Justin Simmons and or sign him to a $15 million per year deal, and they pick up Von Miller's option, then they're not signing any free agents. I mean, that's pretty much it. Is they could then go on and tender their own guys, their own restricted free agents, and that's it. And pick up Shelby Harris and sign him to about $10 million per deal. That's it. Otherwise, there's just no money.
No money, and yeah, this is where you've really gotta think long and hard about how these things add up, because and where you're spending the money, because you can argue that if you're spending the most at safety of any team in the league, is that a wise allocation of resources? Is that something that you can really afford to do, even if you have a cost-controlled quarterback drink? Nobody's going to be in the ballpark of spending $30 million plus on two safeties, and this is where having good players also butts up against the overall roster needs, because even if they don't bring back Von Miller, there are still some positions, specifically cornerback, that are probably in greater need of investment. So you look at Kareem Jackson, as good as he's been. Can you find a safety that can be 85% of Kareem Jackson for 50% of the cost or less?
Yeah, and that is, I think, a really tough ask. And this is where, as a general manager, you have to be on top of everything. And I think, just to be completely honest, John Elway dropped the ball on the safety position a little bit. The Broncos haven't drafted a safety since they drafted Kareem Jackson and Will Parks. What was it, 5 years ago?
Yeah, 2016.
Yeah, so that's an error on the GM's part. Now, this position looks great, and that's the tough thing, is it's tough to allocate resources to a position that already looks great when you are struggling in so many other areas. But it's just one of those things you have to be on top of. Oh, okay, it's been 2 years since we drafted a safety. It's been 3 years since we drafted a safety. We probably need to get someone in the pipeline. And the Broncos, it's not like they have people in the pipeline. I mean, it's Trey Marshall, end list. And Will Parks, they brought him back, and he's an option for them. But again, they also let him go last year, So the way they've been managing the position has been a little bit reckless, I think. And you're now left in a place where, if you want the position to be a strength of your team, I kind of think you have to pay both of them, because you just don't have too many options. Now, if you're going to tell me, hey, we're going to go back to the Justin Simmons, Will Parks combo, I'm listening, and I think it could work out. But again, you're going from, okay, are you paying Justin Simmons because he's elite? Are you paying Justin Simmons because of what he does for the team? Are you paying Justin Simmons because you want to have an elite safety group? If that last part is at all part of it, well, then I think you're gonna need to bring back Kareem Jackson.
Yeah, you would absolutely have to. And guys, right now, without Justin Simmons on the books, the Broncos already have the 11th highest paid safety group in the NFL because of Kareem Jackson eating most of that. And like you said, behind that, there's not much. There's PJ Locke and Chris Cooper, guys. Those are the other two safeties. And Chris Cooper, both spelled with two C's there, not the defensive or the offensive line coach and former offensive lineman of the Broncos. That's interesting right there, that you're already spending so much money. And so the question's going to come down to, in my opinion, if you're moving on from Kareem Jackson to sign Justin Simmons, why would it not be Will Parks that you replace him with? We found out last year, guys, that Will Parks thought he had a bigger opportunity out there in terms of money and in terms of role. Well, he didn't really, and he found that out. So you're signing Will Parks, what, $3 million? Wouldn't that get it done, you think?
I would think 1 year, $3 million. Give him kind of a prove it deal that thanks him for what he's done for the team to this point, but something relatively affordable. Now, the question with Will Parks is he'd be going to a traditional safety role rather than kind of that hybrid nickel man in coverage role that he handled late in the 2019 season and then again late in the 2020 season after he came back out of necessity. So is that something that Will Parks can do well as a starter? That is the question that is unanswered. But again, you're sometimes just making a value call here. And like I said, 80%, if he can be 80% of Kareem Jackson or even 75% of Kareem Jackson, then if you get him for 25% of the pay, you had to do it.
And really quick, something else to factor in here is Kareem Jackson would have $2.8 million in dead money. So you kind of add that on to whoever you're signing. So for this, he'd be about $6 million. But guys, you'd be freeing up $10 million in cap space by moving on from Kareem Jackson.
Okay, so what are you doing with that money?
With the $6 million?
What are you doing with the 6 to 10, whatever the $10 million that you're saving? What are you doing with it? Because to me, I think that George Paton probably looks at this and says, I think Kareem Jackson is the best thing we can do with that money for this 1 year. Remember, it's just 1 year. It's not like you're making a long-term commitment to Kareem. And he's saying, and I'll work on cleaning up the mess that John Elway created at the safety position by drafting a guy in maybe the 3rd or 4th round this year, getting him up to speed, and then plugging him next year. That's basically what the Broncos did with Justin Simmons, right? They had Darian Stewart and TJ Ward at the position when they drafted Justin Simmons. They had him there for a year that he learned under those guys. Then they moved on from TJ Ward, saved some money, put in Justin. I think that is the best way of handling and using this money. Again, if the goal is competing this year, $11 million or whatever it is on Kareem Jackson, I think might be most well spent on Kareem Jackson.
Well, unless you're starting to try to put together some pieces to, say, make a play at Dak Prescott, even though there's no indication the Cowboys aren't going to bring him back. If something goes astray and they can't get him done by the March 9th franchise tag deadline and they don't tag him, is this a way of helping you create some space? I think that's kind of the long shot here. Realistically, I think you're probably looking at taking that $10 million that you freed up. Let's say it's $3 million for Will Parks. You could, in terms of the accounting, say that's $7 million. That's your quarterback who comes in to compete with Drew Lock.
Oh boy, yeah, it could be. Or I'll say another corner back. If you think you can take that $10 million, guys, and move it from safety to cornerback and get yourself a stud on the outside, then I think it's worth it because you're not hurting the secondary, you're hurting the safety group, but you're just allocating funds different within the secondary. That's where I would be okay with it. But here's the thing, and Ryan, I think it's a fantastic point, and my friend Lewis has been hitting me with this, is what you're just going to move on from Von Miller just to save money? I mean, it's someone else's money. I mean, you got to do something with that money. And so with both Kareem and Von, it's a gamble for George Paton because he knows both of those guys, good players win healthy, and the healthy part referring to Von. It's a gamble taking that money and going somewhere else. I think that money can be allocated better, but let's say you go out and you take a swing on a cornerback, guys, and he turns out to be average at best or, kind of disappointing, and you just moved on from a very good safety in Kareem Jackson, well, then you absolutely lost that gamble right there.
Yeah, exactly. There is something developing in this conversation that I find to be interesting. None of us have brought up the potential of keeping Kareem Jackson and not spending all that money on Justin Simmons, which is an option. It is an option, but I think I can just, by reading the room, see that none of us think it's a very good option.
It just wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, it would actually be something that might help you for one year, because you'd still be set as having one good safety, and then Kareem Jackson would kind of train whoever's next. But then you're basically looking at starting over at the safety position over the next 12 to 14 months, because Kareem Jackson would probably play out his deal and then move on after this year. And so you'd be looking at turning over the safety position entirely. And so when you're making those long-term plans, it seems to me like it's easier to get Justin Simmons signed to a long-term deal, acknowledge that he's one of the better safeties in the NFL and that you just have to pay market value for him, and acknowledge that also, as we see with Kareem Jackson, safeties, they really do hit their prime in like year 6 to year 10 if they're healthy. So I'm not too worried about giving Justin Simmons a big money deal and him not playing it out and not playing to the value of that contract. And then you figure out, okay, can we get a 1-year safety? Can Will Parks be the answer? And then you figure, okay, we're going to get the next starter coming through the draft probably when you get to the 3rd or 4th round. But it just seems to me like if they brought back Kareem and didn't bring back Justin Simmons, all they're doing is creating a little bit more chaos at the position long-term than you really want.
And for George Paton, isn't he in this for the long term? He's not in it necessarily for 2021. So that's the long term. And honestly, guys, George Paton is kind of dealt a crummy hand here from John Elway and told to make the best situation of it. I think Ryan and I agree on this, that Justin Simmons isn't an elite game-changing safety that should reset the market. I don't think he should reset the market. I think he's a fantastic player. But what George Paton can't really do is he can't just let fantastic players walk out of the organization his first year there. So unfortunately, he is going to have to overspend on Justin Simmons here and probably reset the market, or at least pay him $14 million, somewhere in that range per year. It's something that John Elway probably should have done 2 years ago, locked him in at $12 million per year for 4 years, something like that. But unfortunately, George Paton is dealt 2 tough hands. One of them is tougher, though, and the tougher hand that you can't do is just letting one of your best defensive players walk.
Well, sort of the natural progression. Any position, the highest paid player at the position is not necessarily the best, especially as they get into the second contract. It's the player whose turn it is. And, Justin Simmons could reset the market this year, and then somebody else at safety, perhaps Minkah Fitzpatrick, is going to reset the market next year. It's just so you're only going to have that 1 year where you're saying, man, we got the highest paid safety in the league. It's just his turn in the cycle, his turn at bat to get that money. And then next year it goes up again. And the year after that, it goes up again. There's that 1 year where you just have to grin and bear it, basically, that say we've spent more on this one player at his position than anybody else. And he may not be the best, but he is in the cluster of the top 5 or 6. It's just his turn to get paid.
So, first of all, I haven't heard that Justin Simmons is looking for reset the market money. Last I heard is they wanted to be somewhere in the top 5. And I think that's completely fair. If we're talking reset the market money, I start to get a little more trigger shy. But again, I understand what Mace is saying in the sense that, yeah, sometimes you just got to do what you got to do. And in this case, again, if it means you have to move on from Kareem Jackson to get the funds to pay for Justin Simmons, it makes a hell of a lot more sense than the inverse of that, because of exactly what you said, Mace. If you do that, you're planning on resetting the entire position in the next 2 years. And that just doesn't make sense when you have a guy in the building right now who's young, fantastic, great leader, great off the field. I mean, just one after another. If you got to do that, then that's fine. You reset at the other safety position if you have to. And your window for having a great safety group is now 4 to 5 years.
So here's another
thing. Well, there's another thing also with Justin. First of all, he's not going to give the Broncos a discount. But second of all, from his perspective, if you're looking at the contracts and saying Budda Baker's making $14.75 million a year, he's better than Budda Baker.
I don't know.
I think he is.
So here's where a disconnect may be, guys. The top 5 highest paid safeties per average right now starts at 14 million with Tyrann Mathieu, then just goes up from there. So from the top 5 are within 14 and 14.75, but 6 guys is a huge drop off to 11.5 million. So that's where George Payton may be saying, yeah, we'll get you to the top 5, close to the top 5, and saying 12 million per year. And Justin Simmons is saying, nope, top 5, 14. So there's a bigger disconnect from 6 to 5 than there is from 5 to 1. And that's where these negotiations could be. And if you're telling me, that you could get Justin Simmons for 12 million, I'm doing that in a heartbeat. For 15, now we're talking about a 20% increase. Then that is something that I think could make you pause and make you think about.
And the one thing that all of those guys at the top of that list have in common, I don't have the list in front of me, at least most of them, is those are strong safety. Those are guys who jump into the box, play multiple roles. And Justin is more of the center fielder guy, although he's capable of, doing those things. The Buda Bakers of the world are lining up all over the field and over the course of a game. And I think that type of value, that versatility, plays into why those guys are getting so much money.
Which is interesting because, if you look at where the game is today, I'd actually offer the argument that having a safety go up against the run is probably less important now than it has ever been. I would rather have the center fielder who is covering a lot of territory than the guy who goes into the box.
I guess that explains our disconnect, and that's fine. It's just that versatility piece where you're saying like, well, okay, I know this guy does this, that, the other thing, and Justin Simmons is extremely versatile for what it's worth. But that's just not the way that Vic Fangio uses him in his defense, and he obviously has a different frame than the Tyrann Mathieu, the Buda Bakers, and etc.
Guys, one thing you can't do, in my opinion, you can't let this Justin Simmons thing drag out. If you want him here for the long term, George Payton, don't wait for the franchise tag. Do it within the next 6 days before the franchise tag, before free agency opens up in 2 weeks from today. Do it now because, guys, the market, I don't think is only going to continue to go up because we've seen guys like Eddie Jackson sign deals within the past year that's made it go up. Buda Baker has made it go up. But you have guys like Derwin James who are going to be able to sign big contracts soon. Minkah Fitzpatrick, Jamal Adams. Those guys are just going to stack on top of each other, and they're not going to be saying, yeah, I want 14.8 because the market's at 14.75. Once these 3 deals get done, guys, we could easily be talking about an $18 million per year safety. I wouldn't even be shocked if, Minkah gets 16, then Jamal gets 18, and then Derwin gets $20 million per year. And so if you wait for one of those deals to happen, well, then there's the market for Justin Simmons. It just got higher. And that could happen from now until the time that you have to, the deadline to make a long-term deal, July 15th.
And that's why I'll never understand kind of why John Elway just kept kicking the can down the road on this. Like somehow magically he was going to get cheaper.
Right.
That's a fantasy land.
Were you rooting for him to play bad?
Yeah, right. I just don't get it. And the other thing, you look at the last few years is the big money goes to a guy like Jawan James. It goes to somebody that you're bringing in as an import via free agency. To me, if George Payton wants to start his stewardship on the right foot, start by living up to the words draft, develop, and then retain those guys that you draft and develop, and start with probably the best draft and develop guy that you've had in the last 5 years on the roster. To me, it makes sense, especially in showing that there is somebody different in charge here. And our priority as an organization is what they're saying is going to be, we're going to reward our guys that we develop, that are Broncos.
Yeah, I really hope that, and we won't know for a little while, but I really hope George Payton is the opposite of John Elway in that regard.
Me too.
You have to gamble. Like, that's what this is. Sometimes instead of gambling on the Jawan Jameses of the world, gamble on your own guys that you think could get better. Now, Garrett Bowles is like the most extreme example of this, but you could have had Garrett Bowles if you signed him a year ago today, you could have probably signed him to a 3-year, $15 million deal.
Right.
Now you're paying him $15 million a year, and he earned it. But if you believe in your guys and you think they're going to be great, gamble on them. Make a bet on the guys in your building instead of the guys outside of your building, and then you don't get comments like the one that came out of Miami where they said they felt like John Elway sat on the whoopee cushion when he signed Jawan James. So, instead of you're the ones that should be seeing every single practice from these guys. If you think that someone, for example, to say someone that's out there right now, Drew Lock would be a great example. If you believe in him, which I don't think we think they do, but if you did and you said, man, he's so good in practice and it's just not quite translating to the field, this is going to be a big year for him. Well, then try to sign him now. Now, again, I don't think Drew Lock is that guy for them, but there's someone out there on this roster right now where they maybe think, look, he's due for a big year. Reward them early, and then you win big on your bet by saving a bunch of money.
Yeah, why wouldn't you do that with Alexander Johnson?
Yep. The two guys are
the name that comes
Alexander
to
Johnson and Philip Lindsay, and they've had a year to sign both of those guys. And now they're both going to make $3.5 million if they get a second-round tender. And you're not really going to get the discount that you maybe could have got.
Yeah, I mean, you could say Phil is coming off a down year. I don't know how much of that was his fault, how much of that was the fault of the usage, how much of it was injuries. But he's not a guy coming off back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons anymore in a Pro Bowl. And so you maybe can save a little bit right now on him.
Well, and Ryan, isn't this when you sign a guy if you believe in him, you sign him when the value is the lowest. With Justin Simmons, guys, he was trending up, then had kind of a slow third year. And then that's when they could, if they believed in Justin and knew all the behind the scenes stuff, that's when you sign him right there. Because I think you probably could have got Justin for, below double digits.
Yeah, it's the way the Packers used to go about things, is that they would sign their young guys and they'd sign them sometimes a year earlier. It was one. Now, they got a lot of criticism for not being active in free agency, but their priority was to retain as many guys as possible. That being said, you have to be reasonable about it because, for example, to just go in the Wayback Machine of 2017, I recall after 2 weeks of that season, you had people talking about re-signing Trevor Siemian to an extension.
There's a difference between gambling and playing the lottery. Yeah, that would have been playing the lottery.
Yeah, and so that's why that's why I think we're probably not talking about Drew Lock just yet in this conversation. But when they've got a certain level of experience, and when they've shown that they can do it over 2 full seasons, at that point, that, I think, is when you have the conversation. All right, let's extend that guy. Alexander Johnson became a starter right there 5 weeks into the 2019 season. He backed it up with a very good 2020. I mean, I'm not making him the highest paid linebacker in football, but I am thinking about giving him a 3-year deal right now.
What about Cortland Sutton? What about Noah Fant? I mean, all of these guys. Yeah. Sutton's a perfect example of a guy where you probably save some money right now if you believe in him coming back from that injury. What happens, though, is when you've created this habit of kicking the can down the road, well, then you get in these awkward positions where you're like, okay, well, we can't afford to pay those guys right now because we have to pay all these other guys who are on the end of their deals to keep them around. So you have to start by getting it started. You got to get it started. You got to get the ball rolling, and it's going to be uncomfortable for a couple of years where you're keeping some of the guys at the end of their deals. You're paying a couple guys early, but then you get in the habit of paying guys early. Over the long term, you're going to save a ton of money.
And what's fascinating, guys, about this conversation is if the Broncos want that money this year in order to sign guys like Philip Lindsay and Alexander Johnson, well, then it may be making the tough decision of moving on from Kareem Jackson, moving on from Von Miller. One of those guys right there opens up at least $10 million. And you're going to need that money if you sign Justin Simmons and you sign Shelby Harris. And guys, we've done a great job, pretty much made it 30 minutes of not mentioning his name. But of course, all roads lead to this. And Stephen Baldino Jr. in our comment section said, does not signing Kareem lower the odds for Watson?
Yeah, that would be awkward. If if you don't get anything done for Watson at any point soon, and then you move on from Kareem, and Kareem, did the recruit job. Well, maybe he's calling up Deshaun and saying, "Hey, you don't want to play for this Peyton guy? Like, he did me dirty."
Yeah.
It's a risk that you'd have to be willing to take. It's another reason why I go back, to tie a bow on this conversation. I go back to the idea that the Broncos are just going to say, okay, we're going to overpay the safety position for 1 year, but it's just 1 year. It's fine. We know we want Justin Simmons here long term. Kareem Jackson is our best option right now. So we'll keep Will Parks as depth. We will sign Kareem Jackson, and we will draft a guy in the mid rounds at the position, and hopefully somewhere in that combination of Will and the new guy, you find your safety of the future at that position.
Well, we've been talking about restructure for Von Miller. What about a restructure that gives some guaranteed money down the line to Kareem Jackson, perhaps too? Is that something that could be an option, that you take that $12+ million cap figure this year, you knock something off it this year, and you give him, say, another $6 to $8 million guaranteed that would come into play for the 2022 season? Maybe that is the way of getting some savings now, but also if you're in the Deshaun Watson conversation, keeping Kareem Jackson around and still being able to get Justin Simmons in there.
Well, what's interesting about that is, remember when they signed Kareem Jackson, a lot of people thought this third year, the one that's coming up, that Kareem was going to slow down and have to start playing another type of position. Well, he hasn't slowed down one bit. At least he hasn't showed us that. But people were saying, okay, this will be a good deal if he plays up to his contract year 1, year 2, then takes that step back in year 3. Well, so far, he's lived up to that deal without a question. But do you want to make it even riskier? Because Kareem's not getting any younger. And what are we talking about, a restructure? I think if you find the right price point, I'm okay with it. But is it just, extending him on a very similar per year deal of $11 million?
It may be, but and maybe your guarantee is you're talking about $6 million, and then you're kicking the cap can down the road a little bit to try to make sure that you get that in there. But I think if you're worried about your status in the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes, if you let go of Kareem Jackson, this is something that maybe you at least have a conversation about.
All right, a couple housekeeping items here. We got a comment from Thomas here who said, I'm a recent subscriber to the YouTube channel. Where do I post questions for you guys? So the questions that we answer on the podcast all come from DNVR members who post them on the most recent podcast post on the website. So after today's podcast, we're going to post this podcast on the website. If you were to comment on that post, we'll read your comments on tomorrow's podcast. So you can become a member at thednvr.com for all of that. Of course, all of our content, all of the other great stuff we do. You can become a member of our lounge, which is an awesome chat room where you've just got people talking Broncos, Nuggets, Avs, food, skiing, everything all day. It's all segmented out, so you can get in on whatever conversation interests you. You'll get a free shirt when you become a member. I mean, I could go on. You get member beers at the bar, which are 6 ounces bigger than anyone else's beer for the same exact price. So there's tons and tons of reasons to become a DNVR member. But to answer your main question, for you, the main reason could be to comment on the podcast. And on the podcast side of things, we, of course, read all of your comments if you are a member. And the other bit of housekeeping is we got to get to our Draftkings pick of the week. Zach, do you have something good for the people?
I do. And guys, sometimes I call this the Draftkings lock of the week. And that's what I'm delivering right now, guys, is an absolute lock. Now, the odds indicate that it's an absolute lock. I've never done this before with the odds being so bad, but it seems like it's guaranteed to hit. So how can you avoid it, guys? I'm going to the draft. Guess what the over-under is for quarterbacks taken in the first round?
4.5.
Ding, 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 ding. Bingo. But now the odds are trash. The odds are minus 600. So it's a terrible return. But guys, I mean, we're talking about potentially 4 quarterbacks going in the top 5. It really seems like 4 quarterbacks are going within the top 10. You're telling me some team isn't going to grab Mac Jones from 10 to 32 or go for someone else? No, there's going to be 5 quarterbacks take. I would be willing to take the odds on 5 quarterbacks taken in the first 15 picks. And you're telling me I get the first 32 picks? Yep. I'm going hard on that. If you want to disagree with me, well, you can get great odds on DraftKings Sportsbook where it's plus 450 on the under, but I think it's a lock that it's going over.
Interesting. Yeah, not a lot of value there, but heck, you could put $600 on that and win 100.
There you go.
Mace, you got one for us?
Well, I wish there were odds on second quarterback taken, second offensive lineman taken. Because, for example, like I'd love to be able to put some money on, say, Rashawn Slater being the second offensive lineman taken, but they only have the first up there, and Penei Sewell is 1 to 10 for odds there. So, and Jamar Chase 3 to 5. So you're not getting very much, but I'm just going to say Jamar Chase, first receiver off the board at 3 to 5 because you can't go broke taking a profit.
Interesting. So Andre, my co-host on the Bet Show, actually gave out yesterday as a nice sprinkle pick Jalen Waddle as the first receiver taken. And if you think about it, this is a similar conversation to what we would have been having last year, right? Jerry Jeudy should have probably been the number 1 receiver taken. Henry Ruggs ended up being the number 1 receiver taken. Why? Speed, of course. And that's what Jalen Waddle brings. Now, it all comes down to if he's going to be able to run at a pro day, and I don't think we have a news on that yet. But if he goes out there and runs in the 4.2s, well, then someone could fall in love with him. Just like they did with Ruggs.
There are a couple of things at play. Number one, with no real combine this year, everybody's running at their pro day. And so there's going to be a little bit of skepticism on some numbers that come out of these pro days. Because
won't scouts get their own numbers while they're there?
They can't. Well, they would hand time them.
Yeah.
And that there's some variance. One reason everyone likes the combine is it's a standard, and it's something where you can measure them all together. The other thing is you're talking about different factors. Maybe you've got a faster track on one indoor facility at one university compared to another one. The joy of the combine is it gets everyone together in a standard environment. So I think we're going to see some numbers that come out that make everybody go, wow. But there's going to be a little bit of skepticism there. And with Jamar Chase, when this, the other thing is, first of all, Henry Ruggs was first receiver off the board, but he went after pick 10. If you're going to take a receiver in the top 5 to 6 picks, which is, I think, the range for wide receiver 1 going off the board, it's not somebody who's just speed, maybe somebody who's more complete. And when this process started back in May and June, Jamar Chase was the alpha of the wide receivers, and some even looked at him as being a better overall receiving prospect this year than Jerry Jeudy was last year, as complete as Jeudy was. And so I think when all is said and done, it's going to come back to the guy who was originally at the top of this receiver class, and that's Jamar Chase.
In terms of value, I do like Waddle there. I think he's plus 700, and I've seen him. He's not the first wide receiver taken on most mock drafts, but he's been up there in a couple.
Yeah, I mean, he's a freak. Before the injury, a lot of Tyreek Hill comparisons being thrown around with Jalen Waddle. All right, well, these guys are going to make you wait to get your money. I'm giving you one that's going to hit tonight. If it's on the board when we're doing DraftKings Pick of the Week, I'm taking it. It's Miko Rantanen over 2.5 shots. He's hit this now 2 in a row. There was a little bit of a lull there at one point, but now he's back to getting the puck on net. It's minus 150. That's okay. We'll take it. And then while you're looking at the shots on goal with the Avs, you might as well just take Nathan McKinnon over 3.5 shots while you're at it. So I like both of those. I think the Avs should be really mad tonight. They absolutely blew one the other night that they should have been in control of. I think you get a mad McKinnon. That's always scary. And Miko will be right by his side getting the puck out there too.
Yeah, they're going to be fired up after listening to our Avs guys over at DNVR after their last performance.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, that's going to wrap it up for us on the live side of things. We are going to jump over to the podcast side. Again, You can download the rest of the pod anywhere you listen to podcasts. Just search the DNVR Broncos podcast or just search Broncos. Will be the first one that comes up. We'll talk to you guys later.